Hello and welcome to Produce Talks. I am your CPMA Education Manager, Jason Corley. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that you can subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on iTunes. Just search for Produce Talks and it should bring you right there. Before I get started, I just want to let you know that there is a upcoming webinar on March 30th. You can find the details at elearning.cpma.ca. There's a full description there. The title is Foreign Exchange Risk. What is it and why should it matter to you? So it will assess how current volatility affects business and the bottom line, and identify some tools to help your business manage their foreign exchange requirements. This is only open to CPMA members. So if you are not a member and you'd like to be a member, you can find details at cpma.ca or call the CPMA office and Lise would love to speak with you. Before we get on to today's podcast, I'd like to bring in Selena. Selena's here to tell us all about this month's Fresh Health Award winner.
Hi Jason, thanks for having me on again. This month's Fresh Health winner is Earth Fresh. As you may have noticed, Half Your Plate ran a office challenge to all of you out there, challenging you to fill half of your plate with fruits and vegetables and to show us with pictures on social media. Earth Fresh posted almost every single day, showing us that their employees really know how to fill half their plates with fruits and veggies. If you'd like to nominate someone for the Fresh Health Award, simply contact me at skarkash@cpma.ca. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Selena. And now on to our podcast. This month, it's all about vertical farming. We're going to be joined by Greg, the manager of business development for GoodLeaf Farms, based in Bible Hill, Nova Scotia. In our conversation, we explore specifics around indoor vertical farming, including technology, unique characteristics of the plants, and how this method of growing can affect the future of the produce industry. Hi, Greg. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
Well, for someone that doesn't know what is a vertical farm, and maybe describe what it's like to walk into one? What does it look like? Are there sort of special procedures to go into a vertical farm or anything like that?
In vertical farms so far, mainly they've been focused on the production of either lettuce heads or leafy greens, baby greens, or microgreens. So our farm is actually an old school that we've taken over and completely converted into a food safe facility that's Canada GAP certified, actually working on SQF certification now. So the classrooms have been converted into your harvesting and packing areas. We've got a shipping receiving area. We've got another classroom that's been converted into our large fridge space to store product. And then at the end of the hall, where the old gymnasium used to be, there's a space that's been completely converted into our grow environment. So you walk in there and you've got a few thousand square feet of space that's got racking with lights and hydroponic trays there where we grow our plants. So you walk in and you look up and you've got about 30 feet high of racking. You've got about 10 or 11 levels of plants growing. It's a really, really cool thing to look at when you walk in and see the amount of production that we have in such a small space.
You're in an old school. I guess that provides a lot of rooms, but is that an ideal location? What do you look for when you're setting up kind of a location? What factors do you choose?
Ideally, you'd want something that's a new build. So, a pretty wide open space. Traditional warehousing would work well. For us, this space was a safe start for our first commercial site. We're only about maybe 100 to 150 meters across the lawn from our first research lab. So the building was kind of right under our nose. And it was a good size to get started. So, the facility we have here in Toronto, Nova Scotia it's commercial, but it's R&D as well. So it was a nice safe space for us. We were able to convert what we have here into something that's workable and usable, but ultimately for sort of the next stage, we'd be looking at something that's more of a blank slate for new warehousing sites where you can add floor drainage, you can build in your nutrient systems and sump pits and all those items much more easily than when you're going into an old building and trying to retrofit.
Anything that goes into the farm is something you bring in. So with regard to like water, growing mediums, even when you harvest, you must have to be really careful about how you go about those procedures with a vertical farm, right?
Correct. The other piece of it is that we are growing and packing in the same space, which comes with its own set of challenges. But we have to be very, very, very critical with what does come into the facility. So we're not seeing our final products for potential pathogens. We're testing raw materials. We've got a really complicated, complex water filtration system to make sure we've got some really, really clean water that's going out to the plants. And we're testing. What we're doing on a daily basis is, it's good for us, but it's also good for our customers. So we're testing water, we're testing our mediums, we're testing, obviously, our surfaces in our pack room on a daily basis in-house, and then multiple times per week sending samples to third parties to make sure that our processes are as tight as they can be. And I think we're challenging some norms in the industry a little bit. We want to be known as the cleanest type of production. So to do that, we had to invest in processes and in technology to do that.
Is there a plan? Because I imagine in a closed environment, like pests and disease must be a huge deal if it gets in there. So what happens if it gets in there? How do you control and limit it so you're not losing your entire facility?
One of the big things that's on our side, with the type of production that we're using, is the amount of crop cycles we have. So if you look at something like microgreens, we're turning those over in about 7 days. So it's quite difficult actually to have pests or disease in that short amount of time. Typically, you need a lot more time for those things to kind of manifest. On the baby green side, we're growing in about 14 to 16 days, depending on the variety. So again, really quick turns. So if there is an issue, you're getting it out typically before it becomes a problem. One of the big drivers of disease in plants in indoor environments and in traditional hydroponics is water temperature. So we keep our water temperature well within limits to significantly reduce the chance of having things like downy mildew disease in our crops. Ultimately, if we did have an issue where we had a pest or disease, we'd have to section off that crop, quarantine it, and get it out of the facility. Worst case scenario would be that we'd lose an entire crop, but we haven't even come close to being in that position, and we've got a lot of mechanisms in place to reduce that from happening.
One of the things I think is really neat about vertical farms is this ability to grow year round. So one of the things that I've been going back to is I notice vertical farms really focus on certain types of product, and I'm wondering if there's a reason for this.
I think for us, it's what the technology can be adapted to today. So microgreens and baby greens are sort of an easy market entry place for this style of farming. One of the big drivers of vertical farming is the ability to stack levels in a small amount of space. So if you're looking at larger crops that take up more space or are taller, it really reduces the economic model, or it makes it not as favorable, unless you're getting a higher price per pound at the end to help make up for that smaller production amount. So really, the model right now is driven by economics. So, you look 10, 15 years ago, people weren't doing this because the economics didn't make sense. One of the big drivers of that was lighting. So you look at high-pressure sodium bulbs or traditional fluorescent bulbs. When you're using that type of technology, the operating cost is too high. So LED cost has come significantly down in the last few years. They're getting more efficient. They've driven the cost structure down. And at the same time, baby greens and microgreens are at that price point that makes sense for the current cost model.
So it's just price point. So it's not that other products can't be grown that way. It's just that it doesn't make sense right now.
Right. So anytime a new market starts up, things are always going to be more expensive. I think about the first time, when VCRs first came out, or DVD players or Blu-ray players, they're very expensive at the start. And, as time goes on, the price comes down. So, LED technology and a lot of the other inputs to what we're doing, it's the same thing. So as those costs come down, then you can start to open up and look at other markets and other products that you can potentially grow.
One of the things that we're seeing a lot now, at least in Ontario, is greenhouse grown strawberries. So we're getting Ontario grown strawberries. I don't know if it's year round or not, but I've seen them in the grocery stores here lately. So that type of thing, can that happen with vertical growing, or do the lighting conditions allow for things like bees for pollination and things like that?
So it's something we've kind of looked at from, I would say, a high level. We haven't gotten too far down that road in terms of research and trialing and understanding. It's something that we're really interested about and would definitely like to get into at some point. But for now, our focus has really been on baby greens and leafy greens. And a big driver of why we're looking at those as well, not only the cost structure, I guess, that we talked about earlier, is their functionality. So looking at the health benefits and nutrient content of microgreens is, for some items, are just they're off the chart pretty high. And that health consciousness and nutrient density is a big driver for us. So we focused on those for now, but I think in a few years down the road, you might see us looking at strawberry production as well.
So sticking with the economics, like you've mentioned that LED lighting has really brought costs down. So how does energy consumption compare to other forms like a greenhouse or a field operation?
The cost production, from an energy perspective, the biggest driver of that is the LED lighting. So you're completely supplementing outdoor light with a highly efficient LED bulb. So we don't have any outdoor light at all. The fact that we have stacked levels means it just really wouldn't make sense. Only the top levels would get any light. From an economic perspective, it makes sense for us to grow this way. We don't think that it makes sense in every market. So if you look at places like California, from a water perspective, maybe it would make sense to put our system there because we're about 90% efficient with water use. But from an energy perspective, maybe that model doesn't make sense because we've got enough sunlight in that area to grow in a traditional field environment, or somewhere else you might use a greenhouse. So we're really careful about saying that vertical farming is a solution everywhere and that it's always going to be the best fit and we're going to save the world with vertical farming. It's really about finding the markets that it makes sense. So places that don't get sunlight all the time, markets that might be too cold to grow year round. But for us in this market, it makes sense.
We haven't really talked about the lights themselves yet. So when you look at a vertical farm, a picture of one, everything looks kind of reddy purple.
Mm-hmm.
So why is that?
The lights that are on the market now, there's a few larger manufacturers that have gotten into this space. They've been doing a lot of work on light spectrum. So the first generation of Philips and Illumatex and a few other companies focused in on this sort of blue-red spectrum, so it looks kind of purple to you for production indoors. So that spectrum of light is really dialed into roughly what the plants are looking for. So in the field environment or in a greenhouse, plants aren't using that full spectrum of light that they're getting from the sun. And also, likewise, if you look at a traditional fluorescent bulb that's been used in the past in some applications to grow, that's a really wide spectrum of light as well. The plants don't need that full spectrum. So narrowing in, it helps in a couple ways. One is you're not wasting energy on producing wavelength that the plants aren't going to use, so you get a bit of cost efficiencies there. But you're also providing the plant exactly what it needs. So that light spectrum really enhances a few things. You can actually enhance taste and flavor with different light spectrums, texture of the plant, and you can also speed up the process of growing just by using light. So we're actually really excited about where the light story is headed. We're looking at developing our own spectrums with manufacturers to change taste profiles of products, to change the texture, and ultimately to actually enhance nutrient content in different plants as well, just by changing the light spectrum.
Seriously? The light matters that much?
So the overall environment is actually the largest driver of nutrient content in a plant that can actually be taken up by a person. So there's some really cool science coming out about your temperature, your humidity, your water levels, and your light spectrum and how it actually enhances nutrient content. So we're actually doing some work now to look at different light spectrums specifically for the plants that we're growing.
We did a podcast with NASA about a year and a half ago, where they talked about just being able to grow in space, but I didn't know that the light spectrum can affect the taste and texture of the plant. That's insane.
Largest drivers of overall plant characteristics. So in our lab space, probably about 2 years ago, we had run a trial with, I think it was 2 or 3 different lights from different manufacturers on the same type of arugula. And so it's almost like sort of the Goldilocks thing. One wasn't very spicy. One was like, you'd eat it and your eyes would start to water, and then one was just right. And the only difference between those were the light spectrum. So it's really interesting to see what's going on there, and we're going to be kind of researching that further.
And now it's time for a quick break to hear from our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms. All right, and on the line we have Chris from Nature Fresh. Chris, I understand things are well underway at Nature Fresh?
They certainly are, Jason. Here we are at the end of February, and we're already into picking our first Canadian crops in Leamington. We picked our first crop of heritage tomatoes today, and we'll be ramping up to pick the balance of our commodities over the next couple of weeks. You'll start to see more Ontario-grown product on store shelves across Canada, which is great news, considering through the winter we don't necessarily have the greatest quality because we have to rely on production significantly south or overseas. So it's nice to see that we can get Ontario-grown product back on the shelves where it matters.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
And now, back to our conversation with Greg from GoodLeaf, all about vertical farming. So, and I have to ask this question because I'm the offspring of 2 proud Nova Scotia Agriculture College graduates who now it's been taken over, and it's the Dalhousie Agriculture Campus. Has there been any interaction with the university around some of this research or vertical growing itself?
Definitely. So quite a few of our employees early on and still today are grads from the program. So we were really well integrated early on when we had our R&D lab set up. So we were in the Perennia Innovation Center, which is in Truro, Nova Scotia, maybe about a 5-minute drive from the college. And they were really big supporters. So they helped us understand, where we could get funding. They helped us do some early stage research. And we're still hiring grads out of the school. So they've definitely been a big help for us. So on the TrueLeaf side, so our parent company side, VP of R&D and Research, Dr. Richard Donald, is actually a former Associate Dean of Research from the college and former CEO of Perennia. So we're definitely well linked with them.
Part of what GoodLeaf does and TrueLeaf is developing this technology through research, like you said. So I don't know if you want to answer this question, but can you highlight any unique technology that GoodLeaf has that differentiates itself from other vertical farming processes?
It's not necessarily the technology that differentiates us. It's really about the techniques and the applications that we're using it for. So, as I mentioned, we're looking at some research in LED technology that's really focused on enhancing plant flavors and textures, but then also looking at the nutrition side of things. So we're hoping to use the technology not only just to grow plants for traditional supermarket and wholesale markets. We're also looking at potentially getting into the biomedical and nutraceutical markets using the technology. So I think it's more of our application that's different and the markets that we're addressing.
Because I know that there's been some other organizations that have tried to start vertical farms. So are you saying that approach? Well, sorry, they've tried to start vertical farms and failed, but yours seems to be thriving. You're opening a second location in Guelph. So is it that approach that's helping you succeed?
I think so. We started a few years ago not from the perspective of we're going to build this really cool technology, we're going to grow some plants, and then we're going to go out and try and sell it and realize, oh, wow, the way we're producing is going to mean that your head of lettuce is going to be $10. And there's no market for that type of product. So we came at it from a different perspective and kind of worked backwards. So we went out early on with an idea and talked to different customers, talked to retailers and said, okay, this is what our idea is. This is what we're going to do. Are you in? And from that perspective, we found out a lot about the market. So, what is the price that people are willing to pay? What does logistics look like? And then built the farm based around that. So we didn't just build technology and say we've got a bunch of lights. It looks really cool. Buy our lettuce. We said, okay, we know our price. We got to work backwards, and we got to make a farm that makes sense and works with those economics.
I think that's a good. Well, I guess it's sound business practice, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, anybody can kind of go with a cool idea, but if the end price is too high, no one's going to pay for it. And I think ultimately the end consumer. For the first time when they find out how our plants are grown, they're going to look at it and say, oh, that's really cool. But at the end of it, they want to know that they've got a really good, fresh-tasting product that's local, pesticide-free, and at a good price.
Okay, well, let's switch to consumers then, because one of the things I'm wondering is, and you've mentioned that the light can change with the texture and the taste. So how do your products compare with traditionally grown products? Is there a big difference in texture and taste?
Obviously, we're a bit biased about it internally, but we did quite a bit of research early on from our lab, doing focus groups and comparative studies to your traditional packaged salads that are on the market here in Nova Scotia. And the biggest thing that we got out of that was just the taste profile. So if you look at a traditional spring mix or any type of kale blend or something that's on the market, you kind of get this mishmash of flavors. You could eat two different leaves and they might kind of taste the same. But with ours, you get this really cool, this massive difference, I guess, between different plant varieties. So you can taste a Swiss chard and a kale and a spinach in a blend, and you really can tell the difference between those three. And it tastes fresh. You get this really nice freshness that you don't, traditionally see on the shelves, especially in Atlantic Canada, being, so far away from California, where traditionally a lot of these products come from. Just the fact, that we can get it on the market in 24 to 36 hours versus 7 or 10 days adds to that story as well. But there's a definite difference between freshness and taste and texture, and you can see it on the shelf.
Have you had much interaction with consumers about vertical farming? I'm wondering how they're reacting to their food being grown in an old school under these weird futuristic lights. Like, how does a consumer look at that and go, that's where my food comes from?
It's been interesting. So we going into it, we knew that there's always going to be people that are skeptical of it, and they're going to question the process and how we do it. And we're totally open to that. We know everybody has a different idea of how food should be grown and distributed. Honestly, we haven't had too many people saying anything negative. The people in restaurants or or in retailers have all just been positive about, hey, I can get this really cool, fresh, local product, and that's what they care about. But they've got something that's fresh, it tastes good, it's healthy, and it's a good price. And that's kind of been the discussion around it. What we want to do, though, from our perspective, is be really transparent about what we do. We're not going to go out in the market and try and hide that we're using LED lights or that we're growing hydroponically. We want people to know what we're doing. We want them to know the good things about it, the bad things, and just be upfront with them and let them make the decision. And I think ultimately they'll go and say, this is a nice fresh product, I'm going to buy it.
So when vertical farming was first kind of introduced as a concept, at least my first introduction to it was when I was at a conference, and there was a futuristic speaker there, and he was talking about these huge skyscrapers filled with rooms growing food really in dense urban areas. So the agriculture moving to that urban location. So do you think that we're headed in that direction? And if so, how are we going to get there?
Potentially, I think that's something that can happen. I mean, you always look at new, different, futuristic ideas and sort of that utopian kind of mindset. When you look at cars from the future, they always look like they're, you might have hover cars and all that stuff. And it's always, it might get there at some point, but you got to have steps along the way to get there. There's not going to be this massive giant leap to skyscrapers. What we've looked at, I mean, one of the biggest drivers of cost as well is square footage, so leasing space or buying space. So if you look at a downtown core like Toronto, we could have said, okay, we're going to go and we're going to set up shop in a skyscraper in downtown Toronto, but the economics just don't make sense. Being able to grow what we can grow in a certain amount of space, the cost per square foot doesn't make sense. So you've got to look at, the traditional supply chain and say, okay, if I'm going to grow and sell into a large retailer or into a large wholesale distributor, where are their distribution centers? Typically, they're in the outskirts of larger cities in places where the cost per square foot is reduced. And that also happens to be where there's warehouse space that we can use. So you've got to look at a few things. The costing is big, but then also how do you have access to the market? And it doesn't make sense if we're going to sell into the GTA to be producing downtown, shipping it out of the city into distribution centers, and then back into the city again. So there's a lot of drivers, I guess, that kind of determine where you're going to grow. The one piece that I think would be interesting, and we've talked about it internally a bit with the sort of the skyscraper model, is looking at large developers have typically height limits on buildings in some cities. So looking at a developer that wants to build a 20-story building in Toronto, and that's the height limit, but they'd like to get 2 more floors. Typically, they can't sell the bottom 2 floors of a skyscraper at as high of a price as they can as the higher floors. So some developers have looked at us and said, well, maybe I can go to the city and say, we'll convert those bottom 2 floors that aren't as productive for me into growing space. So I have an add-on for the people that live in the building. And then I can add 2 more floors on the top. Go to the city and say, I'll add 2 more floors to the top. And the prime real estate offset it with having food production in the lower 2 floors. So we've talked about that a bit, and maybe that's the concept and where it heads.
Just because it's kind of a topic that comes up every once in a while, have you ever looked at doing anything in the north? Because that's one of Canada's major issues in terms of, food insecurity is making vegetables available in the north. So is this a solution for that problem, do you think?
We early on had looked at doing a project in Iqaluit using our technology. There's a few things, I guess, that kind of drive, the success or failure of a project like that. But one of the big things that we looked at early on is the market itself. Are they going to actually take up the products that we're growing? So we're growing your daikon radish, your pea shoots, kale, all those microgreens, which are sort of specialty products. And then we've got our traditional, baby spinach, arugula, kale. But how easily is the market there going to take up those products? We weren't quite sure. You have different taste palettes and preferences in the area. So understanding the market is a big component of that. And the other is the cost of production. So looking at, for us, obviously needing access to electricity and fresh water is a bit of a concern in the area. So that's a big driver of whether that's going to succeed or fail. And the other is you really need to find somebody who's a solid partner on the ground to help take the project off. So whether that's partnering with the government or partnering with an economic development agency, they're the ones who drive the bus in that situation. We've looked at it. It's something we might do down the road.
In your opinion, what's the future for vertical farming? And what's the catalyst that's going to really kind of push this to the next level and expand this as kind of, will this ever be a mainstream production model?
Yeah, we're hopeful that it will be. And back to my point earlier about putting these in the right market, I think it has its role to play in certain areas. I don't think we don't think that it's the be all end all to overall food security, but it's a piece. So, traditional farming is going to play a role. Greenhouse production is going to play a role. Vertical farming is going to take more of a role than it has now. And we think, we're going to be around for the long haul. And, we really want to be a part of what's going on here in Canada and the U.S. In vertical farming.
And that's it. That's all that we have for you this month on Produce Talks. I'd like to thank Greg from GoodLeaf for joining us and letting us all know a little bit more about vertical farming. I'd like to thank Selena for letting us know all about this month's Fresh Health Award winner, our sponsor, Nature Fresh Farms. We couldn't do it without you. And thank you for listening. We want to hear from you. We want to know how we're doing. Maybe you have an idea for a podcast. You can email us by emailing podcast@cpma.ca. That's podcast@cpma.ca. Till next time, make a healthy choice. Fill half your plate with fruit and veggies.
You will now be disconnected by the moderator.